The Kremlin, which did not provide evidence to support the claims, said it reserves the right to take retaliatory measures where and when it sees it fit. Kyiv denied any involvement. Russia claimed Wednesday that Ukraine tried to assassinate President Vladimir Putin in an overnight drone attack on the Kremlin. News that draw denials from Kyiv and furious demands for retaliation from nationalists in Moscow. The accusation, which the Kremlin made without providing evidence, was the latest in a string of reported incidents from the war's front lines. Kyiv said it had nothing to do with the alleged incident and suggested it could be used as a pretext for a new Russian attack in Ukraine. The US had no notice if there was a drone attack against the Kremlin by Ukraine. 3 US officials said. 2 of the officials expressed skepticism that a drone attack could get that close to the Kremlin, given that there are so many air defense systems protecting Russia. An attack on the heart of Moscow, even if it is foiled, would be a dramatic illustration of Russian vulnerability ahead of unexpected Ukrainian counteroffensive that will seek to push the Kremlin's forces out of the occupied land. Russian military and special services disabled 2 attacking drones, sending debris crashing onto the grounds of the seat of government, the Kremlin said in a statement on its website. It blamed the alleged attack, in which it said no one was hurt, on Ukraine. We view these actions as a planned terrorist attack and an assassination attempt targeting the president, carried out ahead of Victory Day, the statement said, referring to the celebration next Tuesday of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Russia reserves the right to take countermeasures wherever and whenever it deems appropriate, it added. Video circulated widely on social media Wednesday showing an object exploding over the Kremlin, the building's roof on fire and smoke rising from the area. Dmitry Medvedev, former Russian president and one of the most vocal supporters of the war, told RIA Novosti that there were no options left except for the physical elimination of Zelensky and his cabal. Some military analysts question whether the alleged incident could be seen as an assassination attempt. This looks like Ukraine is trying to bring the war home to Russia by hitting symbolic targets, the head of intelligence at the Lebec consultancy, Michael A. Horowitz, a geopolitical and security analyst, said on Twitter. Russia has frequently accused Ukraine of planning attacks inside the country, often being met with official denials. The 2 US officials were skeptical that any drone Washington might have provided to Ukraine would have been used because it would have had to fly very far from Ukraine all the way to the Kremlin. Neither officials could say whether the report could be a disinformation campaign by Russia or not, adding that they were still trying to figure that out. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at the World Press Freedom event Wednesday, "I would take anything coming out of Kremlin with a very large shaker of salt." Ukrainian agents have pursued drone attacks inside Russia, contrary to US and Western wishes, according to a batch of leaked US intelligence documents. James Nixie, the director of Russia and Eurasia program at the Chatham House think tank in London, said he was also skeptical. Let's be clear on what this is not. It's not an assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. That's just what the Kremlin is saying, he said in an emailed comment. The 2 most likely possibilities are a warning shot across the bows by Kyiv or a false flag operation by Moscow designed to justify more intense attacks in Ukraine or more conscription, he said. Russia has made the allegation 14 months into its invasion of Ukraine and ahead of an expected counteroffensive by Kyiv's military. Russian forces have struggled to make substantive progress in their own push over the winter, a campaign focused on a brutal battle for the eastern city of Bakhmut, which seems to have come at a steep cost for both sides. After domestic blowback to the call-up of hundreds of thousands of military reservists last year, the Kremlin has recently stepped up its efforts to recruit members to fight in Ukraine with slick advertising campaigns and new legislation. But the war has also increasingly been brought home in a wave of recent incidents in the country, as both sides seemingly launched drone attacks ahead of a crucial fighting to come. A large fire was blazing earlier Wednesday at a fuel depot near a key bridge connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. Authorities blamed the incident on the drone attack, days after another caused a fire at a nearby oil terminal and blasts derailed freight trains in a region bordering Ukraine. Also, Wednesday, the US said it is sending Ukraine $300 million in additional military aid, including ammunition for high-mobility artillery rocket systems, more commonly known as the HIMARS, howitzers, artillery, and mortar rounds. The aid package is the 37th since the war began in February. Russia's FSB, meanwhile, arrested 7 people it said were connected with the Ukrainian intelligence and planning a series of high-profile sabotage and terrorist attacks in the annexed peninsula. Russian war hawks also weighed in after the alleged drone attack on the Kremlin, speculating about potential escalation by Moscow in response. Maybe it will kick off for real now, Margarita Simonyan, the head of the Russian state broadcaster IT, posted on Telegram. Simonyan is one of the most vocal pro-war public figures in the country. In a Telegram post, Vyacheslav Volodin, the Speaker of Russian Parliament's lower house, demanded the use of weapons capable of stopping and destroying the Kyiv terrorist regime. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of Russia's Wagner Group, whose mercenary forces have led the assault on Bakhmut, said the Ukrainian counteroffensive had already begun. The enemy has also become more active outside the historical borders of Ukraine, the Russian Federation, Prigozhin said in a statement. We see the situation in our various areas, trains, drones, and so on. Therefore, I think that everything has already gone. When it will become active, I think that in the near future, maybe days, he said. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has denied his country carried out an alleged drone attack on the Kremlin, which Russia says was an attempt on President Vladimir Putin's life. We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities, he said, speaking on a visit to Finland. Ukraine has said the Russian accusations are merely a pretext for massive attacks on its territory, and the US says it is treating the Russian claims with a lot of caution. Mr. Putin appears to be one of the most closely guarded leaders in the world. At Putin events in Moscow attended by BBC journalists, extremely tight security has been put in place, including extensive checks and long convoys of vehicles with airspace closed and traffic halted. However, if what the Kremlin is saying is true, it will raise questions about how well protected the president really is. There will also be scrutiny over the effectiveness of Russian air defenses. In recent months, anti-aircraft systems have been spotted in Moscow rooftops in the vicinity of key buildings. They have been placed there because the Kremlin is concerned that Ukraine, or those sympathetic to Ukraine, may attempt to carry out aerial attacks on high-value targets. Whatever actually happened on Wednesday morning, the question now is how Russia will respond. Some officials have already called for tough action. Russian generals have warned many times of harsh responses to any strikes on Russian territory. But it is unclear whether Russia has the capacity to carry out meaningful retaliatory strikes or whether this incident will lead to any significant escalation on the battlefield inside Ukraine. A Ukrainian presidential advisor told the BBC the incident indicated Russia could be preparing a large-scale terrorist provocation in Ukraine. Mikhailo Podolyak said attacking Moscow made no sense for Ukraine but would help Russia justify its own attacks on civilian targets. Russian strikes on Ukraine's southern Kherson region killed 21 people. Mr. Zelensky said the shelling had hit a railway station and a crossing, a house, a hardware store, a grocery supermarket, and a gas station. The victims included supermarket customers and employees of an energy company who were performing repairs, officials said. Mr. Podolyak added that any drones flying over locations in Russia were down to guerrilla activities of local resistance forces. Something is happening in RF, quote-unquote Russian Federation, but definitely without Ukraine's drones over the Kremlin, Mr. Podolyak said. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said he could not validate Russia's accusations that Ukraine had tried to kill Mr. Putin, but said he would take anything the Russian presidency said with a very large shaker of salt. Mick Mulroy, a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and CIA officer, told the BBC that if reports of the incident were accurate, it was unlikely to be an assassination attempt, as Ukraine tracks President Putin's movements closely and he was not in Moscow at the time. This may have been to show the Russian people that they can be hit anywhere and that the war they started in Ukraine may eventually come home to Russia, even the capital, he said. Alternatively, if the reports were not accurate, Russia may be fabricating this to use as a pretext to target President Zelensky, something they have tried to in the past, Mr. Mulroy said. Russia also noted the alleged drone incident had come shortly before Russia's May 9 victory parade in Moscow, which foreign dignitaries were expected to attend. The parade will go ahead as planned, Russian officials said. Moscow's mayor announced a ban on unauthorized drone flights over the city. Several Russian cities had already announced they would scale back this year's Victory Day celebrations. Russian authorities have cited security reasons and attacks from pro-Ukrainian forces for the changes. Explosions and fires have occurred in Russia in recent weeks.